Hello, everyone. Oh. Thank you for having me here today. When I was invited to speak about my experience and work, I reflected on that, and I thought it's only fitting that I would go back to 2011, a year that has impacted and, of course, turned my life upside down. It started in early February 2011, inspired by all the revolutions and uprisings in Egypt and Tunisia. My best friend sent me an email, and he said, how about we organize a simultaneous protest that happens at the same time in Benghazi, in Tripoli, 5 p.m. on February 17th. And it never happened. Violence erupted on February 15th, and within a few weeks, there was war. I only remember back then that I was shell-shocked because in one moment we wanted to discuss how we could have reform, what we could do, how we could mobilize, and in the next I had to listen to bombs. And the intervention, which lasted for 8 months in a city where I lived, was unfortunately done by countries also like Norway. I never heard from my best friend again. He was killed in detention a few days after he was taken. And that's why I joined the February 17th coalition, which was a civil part of the opposition in Benghazi. And I joined in the humanitarian division. So I was, in the 8 months, trying to organize for a field hospital in Tripoli for the rebels when they entered the city. And in those long 8 months, my brother and a lot of my uncles were at the front. So I knew which side I was on. And finally, after not wanting, but also getting used to the bombs, the long bow cuts, the complete besiegement, there was no internet working. Most TV networks were not working. The phone coverage did not work between the East and the West. So we were cut off from everywhere else in the kingdom of Gaddafi in Tripoli. The rebels took over the city and it fell within a day. We were very surprised, so we never used the field hospital. But I joined the military hospital immediately. And in those months, I worked as a field nurse during the war. Of course, I've seen so much, but I was already struggling, not just with the trauma of the war, but also seeing the effect it had on the people around me, how you somehow do not recognize people anymore. And while I have vivid images of like the face of the mother who lost her 4th son in the war, or like how for 2 weeks we've received mass graves every day, and I was responsible for taking families and friends who were looking for their disappeared loved ones. And I've seen how their souls broke when they found them, and the agony when they couldn't recognize faces in decomposed bodies. And that made my rage grow so big. I was in a dark place. And I remember when I worked in a hospital, I completely dehumanized Gaddafi's forces. But then one night when I had the time, I reflected on that, and I thought, that's not really me. So I thought I would punish myself, and the next morning I went to the attending doctor, and I said, I want to volunteer as a nurse for the wounded of Gaddafi's forces. No one volunteers for that from the opposition side. No female nurse would go into the ward. It was protected, guarded, and only doctors would go there. Only doctors who are obliged by their ethical profession to tend to them. No one wanted to tend to them. And I did for 2 weeks. I fed them, cleaned them, took them to the toilet. I never spoke to them. And I always wore my bracelet, which had the opposition flag, to show them exactly who I am. And they never looked me in the eye either during these 2 weeks. But one night, well, it was 6 a.m. in the morning, I was giving a round of antibiotics. And this young man looks at me and he says, "You make me feel inhuman." And I paused because I looked at him for the first time. I looked at one of them in the eye. And I realized, and I saw his grief, his bewilderment reflected exactly mine. And I realized that we were both Libyans, caught on opposite sides of a war that we did not decide, we did not plan, we did not have a say in it. And frankly, at that point, we don't even understand why it started, why there was even a war. So I sat, held his hand, and we cried for a while. I didn't speak to him, and I never saw him again. But soon after, I saw the atrocities my side was committing. I saw the grief they were causing to other people. I saw them attacking helpless cities because they were stigmatized as broken-affy. And I was disillusioned, broken-hearted completely at the failure, but very disillusioned. And then I left the coalition. I went and I said, I don't want to take part in this anymore. And then I joined civil society. I started working on a psychosocial center for traumatized children and youth that soon took also beneficiaries from young people belonging in armed groups. With my full-time job, I was also involved in initiatives to support the first ever elections in Libya, working on gender-based violence and women's issues, ensuring there was a quota, which was successful. We had 30% in the first elections. And basically, like all the other Libyan activists, I ran on low gas and full fire. We worked so hard, non-stop, because in that brief 2012, early 2013, we were free and still hopeful, even if a little bit disheartened. But then another war broke out, and that was in August 2014, was the last time I protested ever, after protesting every week for 2 years. And during those two years, in 2014, I wondered then about our failures as civil society, as what is it that we did wrong, that we had to have another war, and why is this other war happening? So I had so many questions about peace, about why some men picked up guns and others joined civil society organizations and became activists, why some wanted peace and others thought peace was through bullets. That's why I left to do my MA in Peace and Conflict Studies, because I wanted to have answers to my questions. And during those 2 years, civil society activities dwindled so bad, but it never stopped. And at the moment, civil society in Libya is one of the few institutions, and I know this sounds weird, but it is an institution that is the only one that's unified in the country. So it was difficult to continue working after the Second War, but I continued doing that. I trained myself, I studied, and I wanted to be the best tool for other activists, younger activists, to transfer knowledge, train, and I do that still. I train in many peace networks. I implement projects, but also support initiatives. When you read about war, when you see it on the news, when you watch it in movies, you see the dead bodies, you see the destruction, the rubble, the loss and the blood. And that is part of it, is true. But you never hear about the survivors or the people who live through war. You don't hear about the children who pick up guns and stand at checkpoints, leaving school You don't hear about the widows who were never, ever in a position to be empowered to step up and take control of their families. You never hear about the women who start up businesses and build up hospitals, or the women in internally displaced camps teaching their children to love a country that rejected them. You never hear about the heroes, the fighters who don't have guns, who are willingly giving themselves up to have a hope one day in that country. You don't hear about them falling in love, having families, having children, smiling, watching movies while to cover up the shelling and the bombing that's happening outside. They don't tell you about the instability that hangs on your head like a sword, or that you are never safe. The fear, the suspicious, the paranoia, how you walk into a room and you strategize exit points because you are going to be attacked at some point. They don't tell you how once I reached the airport in Libya, I realized fully that I have absolutely no rights, that I am completely helpless, but all I do is standing up high and lifting my chin and acting like I don't care. They don't tell you about the teachers, who are mostly female, continuing to raise generations, the mothers. They don't tell you about all the amazing people who, despite the rubble, the loss, take the active, conscious choice to resist war by building lives. Thank you.